Welcome to This Explainer. If you, or maybe someone you know, has ever stared down the barrel of high school graduation or the end of a college degree, you are probably intimately familiar with a very specific, almost universal kind of anxiety. It's that overwhelming, looming pressure to answer one massive question. What are you going to do with your life? It's a decision that feels incredibly heavy because, well, it is. But what if we didn't have to rely on guesswork or gut feelings or just blindly following the crowd? What if we could decode the absolute perfect career path using actual data? So that brings us to the crucial question, right? How do you choose the perfect career? This single question causes countless sleepless nights for young adults and their parents alike. And it's stressful because the options seem practically limitless, yet the fear of making the wrong choice is just paralyzing. But today we're going to dive into a scientific, data-driven solution that literally takes the emotion and the guesswork completely out of this daunting equation. We're going to see how structured career assessments can provide some truly incredible clarity. To do this, we're going to explore an actual career assessment report created by Allegiance Educare, which was designed by international psychologists. And to make this super relatable, we aren't just going to talk about abstract theories today. We are going to follow a real 16 to 18-year-old student named Gaurav Saroj. By looking at Gaurav's actual data profile, we'll get to see exactly how the scientific tool works in the real world to chart a clear, undeniable course for his future.
Okay, let's dive into this by mapping out our agenda. We're going to break this giant, daunting decision down into three logical, measurable pillars: career interests, personality, and natural aptitude.
Starting right off with Pillar 1, career interests.
Think of this first pillar as Gaurav's compass. Before we even try to figure out what he's actually good at, we first need to establish a baseline of what he genuinely likes to do. Because without genuine interest, even the most wildly talented person is eventually going to face burnout. The assessment defines career interest as simply discovering your likes, dislikes, and knowledge relating to specific activities. For example, if you prefer outdoor games to indoor ones, that might point toward physical professions. It's really just about figuring out if you prefer working with people versus things, or abstract ideas versus concrete numbers.
Now, what's really fascinating about Gaurav's actual scores is the stark contrast. The data shows he scored exceptionally high in two very specific areas: creative words and administrative. Meanwhile, in general creative arts and design, things like acting or painting, he actually only scored average. And this kind of precision is exactly what begins to narrow our focus away from broad, sweeping assumptions. So let's decode that first high score. A high creative word score translates to someone who probably loves subjects like English or history back in school. They want to use words creatively, but usually in a highly structured way. This data tells us Gaurav is naturally drawn to information and communication. The assessment specifically links this interest profile to structured, predictable careers. Think journalism, public relations, librarianship, or legal work. Basically, he likes words, but not necessarily free-form art. We can build on his profile even further by looking at his other massive spike: administrative. This means Gaurav naturally likes to work with papers, records, or numbers in a very set, orderly way. He actually actively avoids ambiguous or unstructured activities. He prefers tasks that involve organizing, planning, and strictly following procedures. He's practical, he's careful, and he's persistent. So now our compass is clearly pointing towards a career that involves structured communication and high organizational order.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, your personality.
Now, if interest is the compass pointing us in a direction, personality is the vehicle that's actually going to get us there. It dictates how Gaurav interacts with the world, how he handles stress, and exactly how he functions in a workplace environment. The report defines personality as your predictable reactions and identifiable traits. And mapping these predictable traits is huge because it allows us to place Gaurav in an environment where his natural disposition is a massive asset rather than a liability.
The assessment contrasts a few fundamental personality groupings. The first two are realistic versus imaginative, and calculative versus enthusiastic. Just take a second and think about which side of these spectrums you naturally fall on. Are you constantly living in the present reality, or are you more of a dreamer? Are you calm and methodical, or are you highly responsive and energetic?
Looking at Gaurav's data, he scored remarkably low on both imaginative and enthusiastic. Now, in the context of this test, a low imaginative score means he is highly realistic. He's attentive to practical things and lives very much in reality. A low enthusiastic score means he's calculative.
He's stable, calm, composed, and has this inner desire to do tasks efficiently. Essentially, he's a rock-solid, incredibly reliable presence. The test also introduces 2 more critical personality contrasts that heavily dictate workplace dynamics and leadership potential: submissive versus dominant and introvert versus extrovert. These traits are what determine how you handle team environments and authority figures.
And this right here reveals such a fascinating combination. Gaurav scored highly dominant, meaning he's assertive, competitive, and naturally suited to take the lead. But he also scored quite low on extrovert, meaning he is an introvert. He prefers working alone and usually avoids compromising his viewpoints. He's a dominant introvert. Basically a firm, highly specialized leader who absolutely does not need to be the center of a social circle to command a room.
Which brings us to our final piece of the puzzle, Pillar 3, Natural Aptitude.
So if interest is the compass and personality is the vehicle, well, aptitude is the engine. It is the raw fuel and horsepower a person has to actually execute their interests. This crucial point is captured perfectly in the report. Aptitude is not knowledge or skills. It's a natural talent. We aren't looking at what Gaurav studied for a math test last week. We are measuring his inherent mental wiring and exactly how fast his brain processes different types of information.
And a very clear picture emerges from the data here. Gaurav has a massive spike in writing skills, but he scored pretty low in mathematical ability. He also scored right around average in conceptual and mechanical reasoning. So his brain is naturally wired for language and words, not for complex numbers.
Now we have to translate that low math score into actionable advice. The report notes that a low score in mathematical reasoning means he should probably actively steer clear of careers heavily reliant on data interpretation, physics, bookkeeping, or engineering. Even if he was interested in them, his natural engine would really struggle to keep up. Fortunately, as we saw back in his interest section, he wasn't really drawn to those fields anyway.
All right, let's bring it all together. Synthesizing data, the final profile.
This is where the true power of the assessment shines. It works kind of like a 3-step synthesis filter. We start with what he wants to do, we filter that through how he naturally behaves, and finally, we verify that list against what his brain is naturally wired to process efficiently. When we run Gaurav through that filter, here is the final synthesis. We have a young man who is highly interested in structured, orderly, word-based environments. He has a calm, realistic, and organized personality, but he's also an independent, dominant introvert who likes to lead without compromising. Finally, he possesses a high natural aptitude for writing, but a much lower aptitude for complex math. The data aligns perfectly here to point him toward fields like law, specialized journalism, or administrative leadership. These are roles where he can be an independent expert, commanding respect through structured information rather than boisterous teamwork or heavy mathematics.
All of this incredible methodology translates into a highly detailed 23-page personalized roadmap. It provides recommended career lists and zeroes in on the top aspired careers matched specifically to his unique triad of interest, personality, and aptitude. It literally takes that abstract, terrifying choice of what to do with your life and turns it into clean, actionable, scientifically backed data.
Which leaves us with this final, really important thought. It's so easy to look at Gaurav's data and see how perfectly it all aligns, right? But what about yours? If you took this test today, what would your data actually say about you? Does your current job or degree truly match your internal compass, your vehicle, and your engine? It is absolutely a question worth asking because the data never lies. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this helps you look at your own career path with just a bit more clarity.